The Violet Death by Gustav Meyrink. The Tibetan stopped talking. His lean figure stood immobile for some moments, and then disappeared in the jungle. Sir Roger Thornton stared into the fire. If that fellow hadn't been a sannyasin, a holy man, that Tibetan, who was furthermore on a pilgrimage to Benares, he would, of course, not have believed him. But a sannyasin neither lies, nor can he be deceived. And yet, what was to be made of that horrible and treacherous-looking facial twitch he had? Or had the firelight deceived him, reflected as it was so oddly in those Mongolian eyes? Tibetans hate the European and jealously guard their magic secrets, with whose aid they hope one day to destroy all foreigners when the time is right. Be that as it may, he, Sir Hannibal Roger Thornton, is determined to see with his own eyes whether these remarkable people do really have occult powers in their possession. But he is in need of companions, bold men, whose determination will not falter even when the terrors of another world lurk behind them. And the Englishman surveys his companions in his mind. Among the Asians, only the Afghan over there comes into the reckoning, fearless as a beast of prey, yet superstitious. Otherwise, there is only his own man, a European. Sir Roger prods him with his stick. Pompeius Jaburek has been totally deaf since the age of 10, but he knows how to lip-read every word. Sir Roger Thornton explains to him, with elaborate gestures, what he has learned from the Tibetan. Some 20 days' march from here, in a distant but precisely identified Himalayan valley, there is a quite remarkable district. Surrounded on 3 sides by sheer cliffs, its only access is barred by a belt of poisonous gas which bubbles up continuously out of the ground, and which instantaneously kills any animal that attempts to pass across it. The canyon itself, extending over about 50 square miles, is said to be the home of a small tribe of Tibetan origin, who live in the middle of the luxuriant forest, wear pointed red caps, and worship some devilish creature in the shape of a peacock. In the course of centuries, this satanic beast has taught them the black arts, and has revealed to them secrets that will revolutionize the world, teaching them a certain kind of chant that can, in an instant, destroy the strongest of men. Pompeius smiles in scornful disbelief. Sir Roger explains that he proposes to overcome the poison belt with the aid of diving helmets and backpacks loaded with compressed air, and so explore the secret of the valley beyond. Pompeius Jaburek nods in agreement, and rubs his dirty hands gleefully. The Tibetan had not lied. There below lay the mysterious gorge, filled with the most magnificent verdure, but bordered by a yellowish-brown belt of loose, eroded desert earth about half an hour's march wide, and cutting the valley off completely from the outside world. The gas escaping from the ground was pure carbon monoxide. Sir Roger Thornton, having surveyed the distance to be crossed from a hilltop vantage point, decided to make a start the very next day. The diving helmets which he had had sent from Bombay were functioning perfectly. Pompeius shouldered both repeating rifles and a variety of instruments that his master had deemed indispensable. The Afghan had stubbornly refused to join them, declaring that he was always ready to enter a tiger's lair, but would consider very carefully before doing anything that might endanger his immortal soul. So the 2 Europeans remained as the only ones bold enough. The copper diving helmets glinted in the sunlight and cast fantastic shadows across the spongy ground, from which the poisonous gas rose in countless tiny bubbles. Sir Roger had struck out at a bold pace to ensure that the compressed air would suffice to make the crossing of the gas belt. Everything looked hazy, as if seen through a thin wall of water. The sunlight was a ghostly green color, tinting the giant glaciers, the gigantic profile of the roof of the world, and giving them the appearance of a grotesque desert. And now they had already reached a patch of fresh grass, and lit a match to confirm the existence of atmospheric air at every level above the ground. Then they both took off their helmets and packs. Behind them the wall of gas shimmered like a mass of water. The air was filled with the scent of amberia. Glittering butterflies, as big as a hand and strangely decorated, spread their wings on the motionless flowers like the pages of a book of magic incantations. Walking some distance apart, the 2 explorers made their way towards a patch of woodland that obscured the view beyond. Sir Roger gave his deaf assistant a sign. He seemed to have heard a noise, and Pompeius cocked his rifle. They passed round the edge of the wood and came upon an open meadow. Barely a quarter of a mile away, a group of about 100 men, evidently Tibetans and wearing red-pointed caps, were standing in a semicircle. They were already expecting the intruders. Sir Roger strode fearlessly towards them, with Pompeius some yards to one side. The Tibetans were dressed in traditional sheepskins, but looked for all that hardly like real people. Their expressions were so frighteningly ugly, and their features so unnatural, with an aspect of terrifying and superhuman evil. They allowed the explorers to get quite close, when suddenly, at the command of their leader, they shot their hands in the air and clapped them over their ears at the same time, giving voice with all the power of their lungs. Pompeius Jaburek looked quizzically across at his master, and raised his rifle, for this strange concerted movement in the crowd seemed to signal an attack. But what he now saw froze his blood. A shimmering, whirling cloud of gas had formed around his master, similar to the one they had just passed through. The figure of Sir Roger seemed to be growing shapeless, as if it were being worn away by the swirling gas. The head tapered to a point, and the whole mass dissolved in a heap. Where before the lean Englishman had been, there now stood nothing but a bright, violet-colored cone, about the size and shape of a sugar loaf. The deaf Pompeius was seized with a wild fury. The Tibetans were still shouting, and he gazed fixedly at their lips, trying to read what it was they were shouting. It was the same word, over and over again. Then suddenly their chief stepped out from among them, and they stopped, at the same time uncovering their ears and letting their hands fall. Like panthers, they leaped upon Pompeius, who responded with a volley from his rifle, stopping them in their tracks for a moment. Instinctively he shouted back at them the word he had just read on their lips. Emelen, Emelen, he roared, until the cliffs echoed again. A kind of dizziness overtook him. He saw everything as if through a pair of pebble spectacles, and the ground turned beneath him. It lasted only a moment, and then his vision cleared again. The Tibetans had vanished, as his master had before them, and he was faced instead by an army of violet sugar loaves. The chief was still alive. His legs had already sunk into a bluish porridge, and his body was beginning to subside, as if the whole man was being digested by some completely transparent entity. He was wearing not a red cap, but a structure resembling a Mithraic building, in which living yellow eyes could be seen moving about. Jaburek brought the butt of his gun down on his skull, but couldn't avoid the sickle-shaped knife the dying man flung at him as he fell, which struck his foot. He looked all round. There was not a living thing in sight. The scent of the amberia had increased and become almost pungently suffocating. It seemed to emanate from the violet cones that Pompeius was now examining. They were all identical, consisting of the same gelatinous and slimy material. It was quite impossible to sort out the remains of Sir Roger Thornton from amongst all these colored pyramids. With a gnashing of teeth, Pompeius kicked aside the Tibetan's face and hurried back the way he had come. In the distance he could see the copper helmets glinting in the grass. He pumped up his diving gear and stepped into the gas belt. The crossing felt as if it would go on forever, and the tears rolled down the poor fellow's face. Oh God, his employer was dead. Dead, here in the depths of India. The ice giants of the Himalayas yawned at the sky. What did they care for the sorrows of one puny human heart? Pompeius Jaburek faithfully wrote down everything that had happened, word for word, just as he had experienced and seen it, though he still could not understand, and sent it to his master's secretary in Bombay, 17 Adharatola Street. The Afghan undertook delivery, and then Pompeius died, for the Tibetan sickle had been poisoned. There is no God but Allah, and Mohammed is his prophet, intoned the Afghan, bowing his forehead to the ground. The Hindu hunters had strewn the corpse with flowers, and burned it on a pyre, chanting their own songs of piety. Ali Murad Bey, the secretary, turned pale at the frightful news and passed the letter on to the editors of the Indian Gazette, and the modern deluge began. The Indian Gazette, containing the case of Sir Roger Thornton, came out a good 3 hours later than usual next day. A strange and horrifying incident was the cause of the delay. Mr. Birendranath Nauroji, managing editor, and 2 assistants who were in the habit of checking through the paper every day at midnight before publication, had vanished from the locked office without trace. In their place, 3 bluish-colored, jelly-like piles were found on the floor, with the newspaper proofs lying between them. The police, with their usual stolid pomposity, had scarcely put the finishing touches to their first reports before countless similar cases started to be notified. Gesticulating newspaper readers vanished by the dozen under the gaze of crowds surging in panic through the streets. Innumerable small violet pyramids materialized on steps, in marketplaces, and in narrow lanes, wherever you cared to look. Before dusk fell, half the population of Bombay had disappeared. An official health decree ordered the immediate closing of the port and interdiction of all commerce with the outside world, as a means of restricting the spread of this novel epidemic, for such it must be, to the greatest extent possible. Telegraph and cable lines hummed day and night, transmitting the frightful news and the account of the case of Sir Roger verbatim across the ocean to the world beyond. The following day the quarantine was lifted, as it was already recognized as being too late. From across the globe came horrific reports that the Violet Death had broken out everywhere almost simultaneously, and was threatening literally to depopulate the world. Everywhere reason was sacrificed, and the civilized world resembled nothing so much as a vast anthill, stirred up by the smoke of a peasant boy's pipe. In Germany the plague first appeared in Hamburg. Austria remained inviolate for some weeks, since they only read local newspapers. The first case to appear in Hamburg was particularly tragic. Pastor Stuhlken, whose venerable age had made him somewhat deaf, was sitting early one morning at the breakfast table in the bosom of his large family. Theobald, his eldest son, puffing at his long student pipe, his dear wife Jetta, daughters Nina, Tina. In short, everyone was there, the whole family. The old man had just opened the English paper that had just arrived and was reading aloud the item reporting the case of Sir Roger Thornton. He had just read past the word emblem, and was reaching for his coffee cup when he realized with horror that he was surrounded by a group of mucilaginous cones. One of them still had the tobacco pipe projecting from it. All 14 souls had been taken up unto the Lord. The pious old man collapsed in a dead faint. 1 week later, more than half the human race was dead. A German scholar was entrusted with the task of casting at least some light on these events. The fact that it was the deaf and deaf-mutes who seemed immune gave him the idea, which was quite correct, that the epidemic was due to a purely acoustic phenomenon. In the seclusion of his study, he composed a long scientific paper, which he announced as a public lecture in a few key phrases. His discussion consisted more or less in drawing attention to a number of almost totally forgotten Indian religious texts concerning the creation of fluid astral vortices by means of reciting certain secret words and formulae, and in supporting these descriptions by reference to the most recent discoveries in the fields of vibration and radiation theory. His lecture was held in Berlin, and on account of the enormous interest it evinced, his orotund sentences had to be relayed by megaphone to the assembled public. This memorable address closed with the lapidary words, "Go to your ear specialist, who will remove your hearing, and take care never to say aloud the word emblem." 1 second later, the scholar and his entire audience were nothing more than blobs of slime, but the manuscript remained. In time gained currency and credence, so that humanity was at least prevented from dying out altogether. A few decades later, in the 1950s, a new deaf and dumb generation has inherited the earth. Habits and customs have changed, rank and material wealth displaced. An ear surgeon rules the world. Music has been consigned to the alchemical formulae of the Middle Ages. Mozart, Beethoven, and Wagner are objects of derision, as were in their time Albertus Magnus and Bombastus Paracelsus. In museum, torture chambers, the occasional dust-covered piano bears its old keys. Author's postscript. The reader is advised not to pronounce the word emblem aloud.